Hi everyone, welcome. The bin that you see right here is the bin that I need to check in on today. Well, I don't need to check in on it, because it's only been 8 days since we last fed it, but you know what? Let's get my little camera remote control gizmo over here. How many days have passed since the 27th of September?
It was 100 days ago.
There you go. This bin is now 100 days of age, and I figured, what the heck, it's only been 8 days since we last checked in on it. It might be in the need for some food, it might not be, but since it's kind of a milestone age for a bin, 100 days, I figured we'd get it up on the bench, take a look at how it's doing. Last time we checked in on this system, we were doing so kind of in a tandem fashion because I always kind of considered this bin more or less linked together with this bin here because the population of this container came exclusively from here over the course of, well, 100 days was the first haul out of worms to initially populate this container, but I did it 3 other times afterwards, and the last haul out, the 4th one, was 35 days ago, 5 weeks ago. So over time, we built up the population of this system up to an estimated 650 worms. I mean, we actually did count the worms one by one as I pulled them out of the old container. But, you know, over time, the population has probably grown in here. I'm hoping that it has. So we're going to go in here, see how things are doing, probably throw in some food. And, oh yeah, the reason we're not working on these together is because this bin over here has sort of diverged from what's going on over here in this active composting bin. This bin is already at that point where I'm trying to migrate the worms out of the finished compost, so it is pretty much in a process of its own, and it's being managed independently now. That's the reason I'm not working on these together anymore. But at some point soon, when it's time to move the worms that I've collected out of there, they're going to be going in here to get reunited with the rest of their family. So let's get this system up on the bench and see how it's coming along. So I guess I was paying more attention to the age of the bin, being a nice round number like 100. And I kind of wasn't paying that much attention to how many feedings it's received so far over that time. But for some reason 12 kind of rings a bell in my mind. So there may have been 12 feedings applied to this system up until now. Today will be its 13th. So there again, that's based on the assumption that it needs food. Things are a little bit cooler down here in my wormery now that it's winter. We're in the first week of January, and I live in the northeast of the United States and the state of New Jersey, where things are a little bit chilly, and my basement's not heated and it is a little bit drafty. So since the African night crawlers are a tropical worm that kind of depends on warm weather to help it keep active and lively, the fact that things are a little bit chilly down here in my basement could contribute to a little bit of a slowdown in my African night crawler systems. So I don't know what to expect. We'll see. Usually you consider these kinds of worms to be pretty hungry, but if the temperature drops, their activity can slow considerably. I like the moisture level in here. The plastic that was covering things here is doing a really nice job keeping things nice and damp. Oops. Alright, I always worry nowadays when I handle one of these African night crawlers because of a story I heard on one of the other channels about how these things just shed a part of their body as sort of a defense mechanism if they feel like they're being attacked. In order to let the head and the front part of the body escape, it'll just chip off the back end of its body. Kind of like if you ever tried to catch a lizard. I remember visiting my uncle's place down in Florida in the summertime when we were off from school when I was a kid, and he had these bushes that were full of lizards, and I would always try to catch them, and when I finally did, sometimes the lizard would escape and leave only its tail in my hand, which kind of grossed me out. It is interesting how certain animals can lose an appendage or a limb and it'll just grow back. I think octopuses can do the same thing, but I'm not sure what the story is with the worm, whether that ever grows back or not, but I don't want to go through that and experiment, and I don't even want to see that happen, tell you the truth. So I always feel a little bit worried when I start messing around with these worms, thinking that if I trigger that kind of a response, it would be a little bit of a bummer to see my worms self-destructing because of my interactions with them. So some of the stuff we pulled out over here already are bits of food from feedings gone by. And I would almost say that after 100 days, is it possible that these were in this bin the entire time, or could they have also come over with the worms at some point? Maybe they've already been in service for a lot longer than just 100 days. I don't know. This one seems pretty fresh. Almost seems like it may have just started opening. The seed even looks kind of fresh in there. This one obviously has been around for a while. And it's breaking down, but it takes a long time for those mango seeds to break down. Other than those leftovers, which are, months and months in the making to get them broken down, there's also this little soda straw here, which is supposedly compostable, so I'm running a little test there. Now I'm starting to find some other leftover bits of food. There's a banana peel here, pretty much intact. I wonder if that might have been part of the last feeding. I'm pretty sure that pumpkin was part of the last feeding for some reason. I don't know why, but it just sort of rings a bell. I didn't review the video very thoroughly from the last time we checked in on these systems, so I don't really recall what was fed to these guys. But I mean, if the only thing we're finding is a little skin of a chunk of pumpkin, then this bin definitely seems to be due for a feeding. I guess we might find a couple other chunks, because I usually don't just feed one chunk of something. There's probably other little leftovers that look similar, like right there. Another piece of banana peel and a mound of stuff. It looks to be another banana peel. It looks to be maybe a tomato and maybe some pumpkin. What a unusual mass of just leftover food, and it's pretty good in size too. So here we have a good number of things that the worms can continue to nibble on for sure for quite a while, I would think, before they start to run low on food. But it's kind of uncommon for me to pull away from a game plan that includes feeding. I mean, I really need to see something that tells me that adding more food would be I don't know, unadvisable, I guess, maybe is the right way to think about it. Because then maybe it'll just start to, rot away without getting any attention from the worms. If you ask me, even though there seems to be a good amount of stuff in here, stuff like the banana peel is just going to, based on its nature, going to take time to break down and will be here for a little bit longer. Some of this mushy tomato goo and pumpkin goo might still just be around because it looks like it could have been partially obscured from being accessed because of its proximity to this chunk of paper. So, I can't say for sure why we've got some leftovers here. I don't want to just jump to the conclusion that the worms don't want it. Maybe they just couldn't get at it. So maybe the trick to this stuff is just to make sure it's dislodged from itself and spread out a little bit. And then I bet you that stuff's going to go pretty quick, at which point they're going to definitely be in the need for some more food. And we're going to give them just that. We'll also give them a little bit more bedding. Because, night crawlers love their bedding. And even though there's a good amount of it all over the place in this system, I want to be generous on the bedding in the early stages of the bin's life. Because towards the end of its life cycle, I'll become really stingy with the bedding. And it's all in the interest of not having all kinds of scraps of paper and other bedding materials littering the compost when I get to the finish line of having a bin that's pretty much done. I'd like for it to be, broken down materials, not scraps of leftover materials. Even though it's not a hard and fast rule, a lot of times I do use 100 days as the threshold for being generous with bedding, after which I start to become a little bit stingy, depending on what sort of a rate the bin seems to consume the bedding at. If it seems like they're just burning away with it anyway and they're going to do fine by having more, maybe I'll continue giving it for a little bit longer. In a bin like this, maybe I'll start to shy away from wanting to put in long, slow composting items that need a considerable amount of time to break down. And maybe I'll just start steering their feedings and check-ins to being more of a food-only kind of a check-in, allowing time for all the lingering bits of leftover bedding to get broken down. So I'm going to get some stuff. I didn't come down here prepared with food, so I've got to grab a few things from the refrigerator to give these guys. I'll bring over my pre-made bedding, and we'll get this bin fed. My pre-made bedding is more of what you see in here already. It's shredded paper cardboard combined with leaves and moisture. And I guess the secret ingredient in here is a little bit of finished castings to give the whole system a little bit of a kind of a microbial jump start. Try to get that microscopic life in there so that it can already start breaking down some of the material in this nice bedding in advance of it being introduced to the worms. What I've got for them today in terms of food is some frozen cucumber, frozen banana peels, and since we're just putting this down on some freshly installed bedding on top of just bare plastic, I don't feel so bad. I've been trying a little bit more nowadays to avoid placing my frozen food smack on the top of the poor worms. Give them a little bit of a break. Not that I think that it can cause a huge amount of problems. The stuff I'm sprinkling in now is some crushed eggshell. And you might remember there was one of these coffee filters draped across the top as we started removing the paper and stuff like that. There was, well, let me bring it over. My thought was that since we've got some nice fresh coffee filters, maybe the one that the coffee is in right now, we could use that one to replace what had been a sort of a top covering piece of paper to indicate where we last fed. We'll just take this piece of paper here, which was our feeding zone indicator, and put it to a better use. We'll use it as bedding down in the feeding zone, and since it's going to be right there where all the food is, my guess is it's going to get a good amount of attention. Alright, let's see. Yeah, we've got that last one over there, which we could use once it's emptied of the coffee that's in it. So why don't we just allocate all of this paper to being additional bedding for the feeding zone. Now I guess we've got a couple more food items here. This is a frozen apple, pretty easy to recognize. And this is a frozen kiwi. Neither of them is cut or broken or anything like that. Very similar to what I had placed into my outdoor worm bin months and months ago. And every time we check in on that outdoor worm bin, we always find that apple still intact and the kiwi, believe it or not, still intact. You can really feel the inside of it all gooey and mushy and squishing around inside of the skin. But for whatever reason, both of those items have been going and going and going, almost unaffected by the passage of time, sitting in my outdoor worm bag. And I've just held off on the, I guess the compulsion to break them open and help them break down more quickly, just because of the amount of time they've taken already. Just remarkable. So I figured I'd let them go. But here, we'll let this go for one feeding. If it doesn't look like the worms have made any progress on them, we'll just help those pieces of food along by breaking them open and letting the insides become accessible by the worms rather than just leaving them. Because at 100 days of age, I don't know. I'm not sure how many more feedings will fit into this bin. It's not very large. A lot of times I find that by the time I reach the 15th or so feeding in one of these bins, I kind of get to a point where I feel kind of uncomfortable doing any further work in the system because it seems like I'm going to spill out the sides and overflow. So who knows, maybe within a couple more feedings, if we continue to be really generous with the bedding, we might find that here too it might be best to just start steering the system towards harvest rather than pushing the envelope and trying to overfill it. Alright, so I've got the newspapers that we're covering things up. This can cover our feeding zone 2 to replace the one we've taken out. And who knows, maybe a little bit of extra grit won't hurt either, right? So let's be generous. I've got so much eggshell as well that I should really be perhaps even more generous with this grit than I am, because I've certainly got enough to go around without any risk of losing my supply. It's one of those things that my mom contributes to. I always get eggshells from her besides the eggshells from the eggs that get consumed here. So I've always got a good supply of eggshells to make grit. Something I usually like to do in my bins is to examine the outer reaches of the system. It's always obvious that we're going to be looking in on the feeding area and then seeing how things look there, but a lot of times I fail to check in on how things are looking on the outskirts of the bin. And while I don't suspect anything going awry here, I just like to be a little bit proactive and make sure I'm not ignoring anything just in case things go wacky. It's best to be on top of it so you can react and respond appropriately. So far things feel just right from a moisture perspective. There's there's worms down in this stuff, so they're pretty happy with it. Sometimes it almost seems like I find more worms in other places in the bin other than where the feedings had been most recently placed, especially with these night crawlers. Maybe it's because they're perfectly content to just eat the bedding surrounding them, and they don't feel the need to go after the kitchen scraps that are placed into the feeding area. Alright, I'm not trying to get this guy to snap in half. He just looked extraordinarily big. But then again, these worms all look very large. Don't forget, these were the adult worms taken out of the container of African nightcrawlers that came from Northeast Worms. They were probably even larger when I first received them. Even though these are pretty big worms compared to what you're used to seeing in my wormery, it does seem to me like they might not even be quite as large as they were when they first arrived here. I mean, they were really well cared for at Northeast Worms with, all that worm chow they get and the huge containers that they live in with tons of room to move around in. This is so weird, Since my bins are on the shelf up against the wall, I wonder if the cool air from outside coming down the wall on this side of the bin could be making things a little bit chilly on this end of the bin, causing the worms to want to move to this side of the bin because of the warmer air touching the bin on this side. Not that it's much warmer, but I would say that the air in the room is probably warmer towards the middle of the room as opposed to right alongside the wall, where a little bit of draftiness can come in from outside. I think we've bumped into this chubby worm on a number of occasions, and I think as recently as maybe even earlier today, somebody commented on last time we saw this worm, how it's probably a European nightcrawler, probably not a African nightcrawler. And I'm not disagreeing, I'm just pointing it out because that worm somehow looks so different from every other worm in this container, partially because of that really bright light-colored clitellum bulge, saddle, whatever you want to call it, on its body. A little bit lighter in color, but look at the size of that thing. I would say that that worm's probably bigger than either of those other worms we put out there for show. So it's always an impressive worm to bump into, and somehow we always keep meeting up with it, so that's fun. Interesting to see. Alright, let's get this system covered up so these worms can get back to work. 100 days of age. Once again, I'm assuming that it's somewhere in that neighborhood of about 13 feedings that this bin has received so far. And we'll just have to see where we go with it next. If the worms do seem to slow down in their ability to break down foods, then especially foods like that apple and that kiwi, if those things are going to, start looking like they're going to take forever to break down, then I will most certainly break them apart and spread the material around so that it could get better exposed to worm traffic and have a better chance of being eaten, rather than just sitting there as a whole chunk of food untouched. And maybe just time, who knows? If these worms are a little bit slow in the winter months, it might just take longer for them to eventually break everything down in the bin to to the point where you want to consider it as finished casting, so it might just take time. We'll see. And I'm definitely sticking with this piece of plastic. It seems to be doing a really nice job keeping all the moisture in everywhere, all the way around the edges, everywhere. It's just about perfect. It only seems like maybe that variance in temperature between the side of the bin that faces the inside of the room, the side of the bin that's got the label on it, versus the other end that's up against the wall, where it seems to be a little bit chilly, with maybe a little bit of cool air coming down off the wall and maybe making just a couple degrees difference, enough to make the worms want to be over on this side rather than over there. So I don't know. We'll have to see if that's something that continues to be that way going forward, because it's only the beginning of winter. It's just going to get colder, so we'll try to keep these little guys warm and keep them active. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.